Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and who wants to take a ride on my little Nelly?
All right, impressions.
All you have to do is straddle the middle and pull on the joystick till it blasts off.
All right. Excellent. Excellent work there. So in this special bonus episode...
That you're doing by yourself, I'm walking out. I feel like I've hit the high point.
You peaked at this point.
Yeah, that's...
So this special bonus episode of our season on the films of 1967, one kind of major pop culture and cinematic area that we hadn't hit yet that we wanted to get to, particularly for this year, is the James Bond franchise. So we are talking about the 1967 entry in the James Bond series, which is You Only Live Twice.
You only live twice.
I feel like your Connery impression is better than your Nancy Sinatra
Of course,
impression.
I don't even know if that's what the song sounds like, but the song is very good.
The song is good,
Yeah,
sung by
it's
Nancy
good
Sinatra. One of the most well-regarded James Bond theme songs, actually. So this movie was the fifth film in the James Bond series. And at the time, it was the final Sean Connery James Bond film, which, of course, turned out not to be the case. But he did leave the franchise briefly after this film and had announced before this film came out that he was planning to leave. I think you can kind of tell as you watch this movie.
Yeah, but I think one thing that we, since this happened so long ago, we were not privy to is like all the fun gossip about how he wouldn't act if like the producers were on set. That's how much their relationship had soured by that point in time. I love hearing stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not the best example of Connery's performance as James Bond, but these movies were still insanely popular. This movie had a budget of $9.5 million, which I think was the biggest budget for any James Bond movie at the time. This season we talked about a lot of artsy films and movies that were kind of revolutionary and changing cinema. And this is like the big Hollywood blockbuster film.
I know. And it's funny because we've talked about it before. I always think Jaws as like the first blockbuster and summer blockbuster and everything. But this has all the elements. If you go down the checklist of what a modern blockbuster is, this hits every box.
It does. And in a way more, I mean, I think with Jaws, it's because of sort of the release pattern of it as much as anything else in terms of creating the blockbuster. But Jaws has a lot more sort of artistic vision than this movie or even Bond movies in general, which are way more of the type of big blockbuster movies we see now that are just, like you said, kind of checking boxes and are sort of anonymously made and are geared toward sort of just giving the audience what they expect.
Well, I will say when I said it, I meant it as a compliment.
Okay.
Because they check the boxes. But one of my favorite things about this movie is that everything made sense in the context of the action. The action sequences made sense.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't just there for no reason. I just watched Black Widow, and that third act is like, what? Like, none of this action has any meaning because there's so much of it and everything. And I thought at least this was like cool, and like one thing led to the next, and it worked for me, but obviously not for you.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, some of the action looks cool, but the plot of this movie is 100% nonsense.
And if you can't see Josh's face right now, which you can't because it's a podcast, it's like,
yeah, that is how I feel. But again, this was hugely popular. This movie grossed $111.6 million. And that may include some re-releases and includes the worldwide release that would have sort of trickled out over time, but still a huge amount of money for a relatively small budget in comparison. And the Bond series obviously was insanely popular, continued to be popular, still is popular. So this stuff works. And 1967 was a huge year for James Bond. 2 months before You Only Live Twice came out, the film Casino Royale, which was technically based on a James Bond novel, but is really a parody of James Bond films. I mean, it was this huge pop culture thing that they could then make a parody, starring Peter Sellers and David Niven and a whole bunch of other people. It is terrible. But it was also a huge hit. And 3 months before this film came out, the movie In Like Flint, which was the second in a series of James Bond parodies starring James Coburn, had also come out. So, I mean, James Bond was just all over the zeitgeist here in 1967.
Interesting to think of James Coburn as a James Bond type, because he's got, that kind of like Southern drawl to him. And I can't see him like, I'll have that martini, shaken, not stirred.
I don't know. I haven't seen those. There was Our Man Flint, which I think was in 66, and then In Like Flint. And I think that was it. And I haven't seen those, but clearly there was a huge market for James Bond-esque stuff.
Yeah, Ian Fleming has made himself some money with these books.
He did. And at the time, the reason that Casino Royale movie existed was that, before James Bond was a huge thing, Fleming sold the rights to some different books to different producers. And so there were a lot of conflicting productions that could come into play. Now, of course, it's all streamlined and owned by one set of producers for the last, several
It's like
decades.
his family, right?
I don't think it's Fleming's family. I think it's the Broccoli family.
Oh, really? The producer's family.
The producer, yeah.
And they take very, very much pride in making things very difficult for studios to put out these movies. Although now Amazon bought, I think, like
MGM, but
so
MGM doesn't own the character. They've just been releasing the films.
Yeah,
I
it'll
think
be
the
interesting
producers
to
still
see.
own the character.
Yeah.
But at the time, and I think in part because of stuff like Casino Royale, that's why those producers are guarding it very closely. But yeah, at the time, there was James Bond everywhere. This movie was award-wise nominated for its art direction by Ken Adam at the BAFTAs. And as much as I was not crazy about it, the art direction in this movie is fantastic.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
The sets are just amazing. So critics at the time, I think, had also gotten a little tired of James Bond, even though audiences maybe hadn't. Roger Ebert said, a great deal of money was spent on the fifth Bond epic in an attempt to duplicate the mystique. But in You Only Live Twice, the formula fails to work its magic. Like its predecessor, Thunderball, another below par entry, this one is top heavy with gadgets, but weak on plotting and getting everything to work at the same time. Sean Connery labors mightily. There is still the same Bond grin, still the cool humor under fire, still the slight element of satire. But when he puts on his cute little helmet and is strapped into his helicopter, somehow the whole illusion falls apart, and what we're left with is $1 million playpen in which everything works, but nothing does anything.
And then like Little Nelly?
Little Nelly, the like prop hell. I don't even know what you would call that thing. An auto gyro?
An auto gyro. Thunderball, not to be mistaken with Thunderball, starring James Dong. That's not a real thing.
Yeah, the James, that probably is a real thing, sadly.
Dave, look up Thunderballs and James Dong.
Don't. This is like when we told Dave to Google jizz in our Star Wars episode.
It made sense for the sake of the conversation.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that is right, that even just 5 movies in, the familiar elements of this series have become sort of parodies of themselves.
I mean, I like that. So your Little Nelly, who we keep referencing, is this like box that comes in the mail and you put it together and it's a working helicopter, and it can shoot down bigger helicopters, and it's not really a helicopter, it's like a bike that flies in the sky.
It's an auto gyro.
All right,
I feel like that's the
fair.
word for it.
I kind of like that sequence. I thought it was fun.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
Gadgets.
Certainly. Yes. I mean, gadgets are a hallmark. And actually, I pared it down, but Ebert's review is like 90% about the gadgets. He's really obsessed with them.
He's a gadget head.
He's a gadget head. And that certainly is an important element of the series, and became so over time. It was something that obviously audiences responded to that, so they did more of it.
Much less important in the James Dong series.
Yes. So Time magazine, in their unbylined review, said, ever since his cinema debut in 1962, James Bond has been the subject of cult and caricature, spoof and spectacular. Now, 5 films later, he is the victim of the same misfortune that once befell Frankenstein. There have been so many flamboyant imitations that the original looks like a copy. Alas, the effects are ineffective. The outer space sequences would be more appropriate in a grade school educational short entitled Our Amazing Universe. and the volcanic climax is a series of clumsy process shots that no one took the trouble to fix. Even Sean Connery seems uncomfortable and fatigued, as if he meant it when he said that this would be his last Bond film. I do like that they already don't believe that he's going to really quit.
Right. But I kind of liked all the effects and, I mean, it was the 60s. I thought that stuff looked kind of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and maybe we just have sort of lower expectations for special effects in older films, but I feel like that's one of the things. I mean, and this movie had a huge budget comparatively for the time. That's one of the things that clearly they put a lot of that money into, and whether it's the effects or again the set design. I mean, just looking around the
Volcano
base
crater.
Yeah, the volcano crater base of Blofeld. Like, I was just astounded thinking of how they built that whole thing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, come on, guys. That's it.
Okay. Bosley Crowther in the New York Times
Bosley Crowther here.
was a little more charitable, kind of backhanded compliments from him. He said, although there's a lot more science fiction than there is first vintage James Bond in You Only Live Twice, the fifth in a series of veritable Bond films with Sean Connery, there's enough of the bright and bland bravado of the popular British super sleuth mixed into this melee of rocket launching to make it a bag of good Bond fun. And there's so much of that scientific clatter, so much warring of super capsules out in space and fussing with electronic gadgets in a great secret underground launching pad, that this way out adventure picture should be the joy and delight of the youngsters and give pleasure to the reasonable adults who can find release in the majestically absurd. So he's essentially saying, what we have now is the like sort of turn off your brain, dumb, fun action movie perspective.
Obviously, it's not for me, but you plebeians out there
Right.
enjoy it with your dumb rockheads.
Exactly. That is essentially what he is saying, but at least he's sort of giving credence to the idea that some people will find this
I kind of
entertaining.
like that it was very sci-fi-ish, and I liked a lot of the turns. And it's funny because you're giving it it's got a pretty good score on Rotten Tomatoes right now.
Well, now and in 50 plus years later retrospect.
Right. And it's, if you look up like top James or best to worst James Bond movies, this is usually always in the top 10.
Well, right, but Connery didn't even make 10 James Bond movies. So if we're looking at from that perspective, this is sort of a lower tier of those Connery movies, I think.
That's fair, but I've never really been into James Bond. So
you're not a Bondologist?
No, I'm not a Bondian. So
sure.
So I mean, honestly, I've seen one of the Pierce Brosnan ones, and I don't really even know if I saw any of the Daniel Craig ones. I never got into this series. So I kind of like this. This was fun for me.
All right. So you had not seen this one, and had you seen any other Connery Bond movies before?
The Hunt for Red October.
That's Jack Ryan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's it's easy to confuse those, though.
No, I don't think I've seen any Sean Connery Bond. I'm almost a newbie to this entire James Bond thing. I'm 000 on James Bond.
So 000?
Maybe. I mean, I've seen 2 of them out of 25.
Right. I think this is the 12th James Bond movie that I'd seen.
Oh, you stink. That's not even half.
Right. No. And so I think that's what's hilarious is that I've seen 12 of these movies, but I would not count myself as a fan. And I feel like I just sort of haphazardly have seen these.
And have you seen all of the Bonds? Like, have you seen Roger Moore and George Lazenby and Craig and Brosnan and
not all of them. I've never seen Lazenby, who took over after this film for on Her Majesty's Secret Service, but made only the one. That I have not seen, nor have I seen either of the Timothy Dalton ones, who only made 2 of them. Yeah. But I've seen a couple Roger Moores. I've seen one of the Pierce Brosnans, and I've seen all of the Daniel Craig movies, mainly just because they're recent and it's been since I've been reviewing movies, and I just end up seeing everything practically. Yeah. So I feel like I've had a good sampling. I've seen 4 other Connerys, I think. And this isn't the worst, but it isn't the best of those.
Yeah. What did he do? 6 altogether?
I think he did, 6 official ones, and then 1 more that was not. There's as we go back to talking about the producers keeping a hold. Right? Yeah, 1983, Never Say Never Again, which is an unofficial entry in the series. But he made, this was his 5th, and then he left, and then came back for 1 more after this.
So that's unofficial. I'm just trying to get this clarified as someone who doesn't know. as in the Broccoli family didn't control it, someone else did, but it was able to use the character name James
Yeah,
Bond.
and because of kind of what we were mentioning related to Casino Royale, where before James Bond became a thing, and Ian Fleming would sell the rights to these books to different people, the rights to the book Thunderball were controlled by someone else, but only that book. So that producer was able to remake specifically Thunderball
Right.
and only that Bond story, but then could use the name James Bond and all that. So that film, which I haven't seen, is a remake of Thunderball.
And do you think Connery just did it because he was like, hey, Broccoli, look what I'm doing over here. Go fuck yourself.
Well,
Right?
obviously, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, because as we can see, even in this movie, I think Connery over time sort of resented being James Bond. So what he felt about that in the 80s after having been away from it for 10 plus years, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. And did that one, I'm just wondering, did that one have like all the like bells and whistles, like the big theme song and the credit sequence and everything?
I believe so, but again, I haven't seen it. I mean, I think the point of that was to sort of fool audiences into thinking this is just a regular James Bond movie.
Never say never again.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the theme song is, but
I'm just wondering who's singing that. Like, what singer is that?
That was Kim Carnes after she finished Betty Davis Eyes.
Okay.
It was a one session
Mhm.
wonder right there. Dave,
Sure.
how many have you seen?
I'm sure I've seen all the Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig ones, but I maybe one or two of the other, previous Bonds, and I had never seen this
What
one.
about your dad? It seems like he might go for like, it's Sunday. I'm going to watch 3 Bonds in a row.
I'm sure he's seen every single one of them. I mean, I'm surprised you're not more of a Bond guy. You love action movies.
Yeah, I just never got into it, but you know what? I'd watch more after watching this one.
All right. Yeah, I know growing up for me, my dad is a huge James Bond fan. And weirdly, I think that's one of the reasons that I didn't watch James Bond movies when I was a kid.
Because you and your dad don't get along.
We do get along, but I think when I was
mortal enemies.
when I was a kid, especially,
Unresolved
I
issues.
sort of, yeah, there you go. I sort of like resented efforts because mainly I don't think he ever tried to get me into James Bond, but he always tried to get me to like sports.
Yeah.
And I think because of my resenting that, I was like, whatever he likes, I'm not going to like. And so movie stuff that he liked, like James Bond and Westerns, I would never want to watch.
That's hilarious that you just equated all of that with sports.
I mean, because I have these childhood memories of literally being like forced to sit through baseball games and like rooting for them to get out a lot so that the game would end and I could stop watching.
But you just never gave Bonds or Westerns a chances. And now as an adult, you've seen so many of both. Cats in the Cradle.
Yeah, so true. I still don't like sports though.
And how's your relationship with your father right
I feel
now?
like it's good. Thankfully, I don't think he listens to this podcast though. He's not one of our Patreons, so that's good.
Well, Roger, come on, man. Support your son. Listen to the awesome movie here.
Anything else on the background of this film you want to mention, Jason?
Josh, you covered most of it. I do want to get into more of your family unresolved. No. Hey, you didn't mention who wrote the script. Roald Dahl. Come on, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that was something that, he was not really a screenwriter. This was his first produced
And
screenplay.
he doesn't like the book that this is based on.
Right, although he was a friend of Ian Fleming's,
Yeah.
but I think his point was that this book didn't really have a lot to put into a movie.
Right.
And so they had to use very, very little of what was in the book and make stuff up. So yeah, actually, I hadn't known that he wrote this. And as I was watching it and his name came up in the credits, I thought, wow, Roald Dahl, this is going to be a really like weird, dark, quirky, and it's not at all.
I didn't know he wrote it until when the volcano opened, the kind of thing, and a giant peach clogged it. I was
Yeah,
like,
that was
"Oh,
weird.
Dahl."
And then Bond went to a chocolate factory and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah,
here?
I think it might have been better off if they would have just let him go all in on Roald Dahl style, huh?
Yeah, but I mean, he clearly, understood James Bond movies and wrote
Yeah,
it to
he
be
did
a
a good
James Bond
job.
movie. Yeah, he did a good job for this, but not for maybe what we would have hoped for from his book, since that kind of stuff.
Wow. Talk about passive aggressive compliment, huh?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
So
hope he's not listening.
I'm pretty sure he's not, because he's been dead a long time. We'll come back in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on You Only Live Twice. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special bonus episode of our season on the films of 1967, we're talking about James Bond and his film You Only Live Twice. And so, Jason, this was kind of like an introduction for you to James Bond, and it's particularly to the Sean Connery version, and you enjoyed it.
I did like it, and I think one of the reasons I liked it is because like those first 15 minutes were so much fun, right? Like the first scene, which is a little 2001-ish, right? Is we have this spacecraft, and then this kind of like bigger spacecraft comes and like gobbles it up.
It's like a Pac-Man spacecraft,
right?
or
Exactly.
something.
And then it's like, and then so now you're set up with the mystery, and like I think that's pretty cool right away. Like we're just stealing spacecrafts, like Grand Spacecraft Auto or something like that. Grand Theft Spacecraft. That's what I meant to say.
Mhm.
But and then he fakes his death, and they give him burial at sea, and then like they wake him up. I'm like, whoa, what? There's so much crazy stuff happening already. And then there's sumo wrestling. Who doesn't want that? And we're off and running here. I was really into it, and I was like, there's intrigue, and I thought fights were fun, and it kind of peters out here and there. But as someone who hasn't been a fan, I was like, I could see watching more of these. This is a good time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely ridiculous. And I guess I know that these movies are ridiculous, and I've seen enough of them to understand that. But I think I was just like, this is so ridiculous. And more so, I mean, it definitely kind of built over time. I think, as those reviews are pointing out as well, that this started as just an adaptation of a spy novel and was more grounded to begin with. And then as audiences responded to the silly, over the top elements, they added more and more and more of that into these movies. And so I don't know. I feel like I almost had the opposite reaction, that there's so much crazy stuff at first. I was like, oh, come on. And I couldn't get into it.
Well, it's funny because we talked about this on the Trip episode of how seeing it now and then kind of trying to process it back in its original point, having seen so much crazy action movie stuff where like I feel like it's gotten nonsensical. At least this like had some type of linear story where I could follow it beat to beat. And in that way I was like, yeah, it's over the top and wild, but like it's a story, so that's worth something.
I guess. I mean, I didn't really feel like this story made sense. And maybe I didn't pay enough attention to it or something, but I just thought it was a bunch of ridiculous.
He steals the
gobbledygook.
plans, right?
Who steals what plans?
Everyone steals every plan, Josh. But then James Bond steals them back, and then they go to the dock, and
The
then he
plans
does
for
one
what?
of his own stunts. Oh, to make rocket fuel.
To
Because-
make rocket fuel? Is that what I think?
Yeah, it's to make rocket fuel because they're sending the rockets up to intercept the other rockets.
But they already did that at the beginning of the movie.
But then they need to keep making it to intercept more rockets to cause a world war.
But why? Well, I got that they were trying to cause a world
Yeah.
war, but wouldn't they have already had rocket fuel to begin with and known how to make it if they were already sending up rockets?
Maybe, but that doesn't mean you throw away the blueprints, right? Blofeld contracted Osato's company to make the rocket fuel, right? And then Bond steals it, and they track it to the docks. And where are these ships going with all this rocket fuel? Where they're going is Volcano Crater Island, man, right? And they're using that rocket fuel to send, because you need a lot of rocket fuel if you're going to be sending rockets up to steal other rockets. You need more rocket fuel than those rockets have, right? So
Do you?
maybe not. But if you're gonna have a whole base, you probably want, and your business is based on rockets, you probably want rocket fuel there,
Is there a
right?
business plan to this whole thing? I feel like the base itself.
You're underestimating the financials of Spectre, I think, on this.
Spectre seems to have unlimited resources,
Right, and so
and they're wasting it on this elaborate volcano thing.
No, they're not wasting it because for so long no one knew where it was. Right, it's a secret base. You can steal rockets out of the sky, bring them back. No one's none the wiser until James Bond has to
Throw a rock at it.
Yeah. So then, what else do you need to understand?
I don't think I understood a single word that you said for the last
I know.
3
I'm sitting
minutes.
here wondering if I watched the same James Bond movie.
Okay, then Bond, who they think is dead, has to pretend to be Japanese. Problematic, sure.
Oh,
So-
yeah. A little bit problematic. Yeah.
So he goes undercover as Japanese.
And so why did he have to have a real wedding to be fake married to this Japanese
Well,
lady?
you have to sell the bit, man.
But
Come
who
on.
was there to be sold to?
Who knows, Josh? As you saw in the Ninja School from Tiger Tanaka, who I quite enjoyed also.
He was fun, yeah.
Yeah, at the Ninja School, people had gotten in. They killed Aki. They tried to kill him. So he was doing his best to like really, really go deep cover, really, Josh.
But really not, because like immediately he just like they go to the Japanese village where he's supposed to be undercover and they just start speaking English, and he's
Deep
very
cover.
bad at being
It's like
undercover.
Donnie Brasco. He's a friend of ours.
Yeah, no. Look, I think it's legit to enjoy this film, but it makes no fucking sense.
Yeah, I feel like I've explained it very clearly to you. And could I have done that without reading the Wikipedia plot summary? Maybe
No.
not. But yeah, then they go to a volcano crater, right? They swim there and climb and rappel, and they're in volcano crater, and then fight. James Bond. And see,
No one ever sings that.
yes, some people sing James Bond, not in this
I
movie.
don't. Do any of the theme songs actually include the words James Bond?
I bet they do.
I don't know why you're looking at me.
Yeah,
I don't
'cause
know.
you're the music
Dave's a
guy.
music guy. Yeah,
That's
come
true.
on. Don't you know the lyrics
Okay,
to all songs?
Look at me,
Dave?
guys.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my summary of the film.
All right.
And I mean, I hope that helped clarify things for
I
you.
enjoyed it.
It did not.
No?
If anything, it made them more confusing.
That's what happened in the movie, I'm telling you.
Okay. I mean, to me, I feel like, though, if you're entertained by this movie, it's almost like either in spite of the nonsense of the plot, or you just don't care about the nonsense of the plot and you're just having fun with James Bond and his auto gyro shooting down
I like that.
helicopters. Right. No, and I think that's fair. If you enjoy the action scenes or the visual style, the production design, all of that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
And what about the direction? He did a very good job there. Mr.
Lewis Gilbert,
who's maybe the most associated with James Bond movies. would you
Yeah,
say?
maybe. I mean, he's certainly one of the main ones, having directed, well, just the one Connery movie, and then he directed a couple of the Roger Moore movies later. I think Guy Hamilton is another one who directed quite a few, I think some of the earlier Connery movies. And, of course, later on, Martin Campbell, who worked with Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig, and Sam Mendes most recently directed two of the most acclaimed
and
ones.
His are supposed to be good.
Yeah,
Mendes
yeah.
ones.
Those are, or at least one of them is.
I mean, look, I just liked it because maybe I hadn't seen it before and I wanted to see what all the hype was about. And if you're looking at it like, did it live up to the hype for me? Sure, it did.
All right. Did you
So-
feel like Connery was engaged, or did he seem
No,
checked
but
out?
I didn't mind that because he's Sean Connery, and at some point I was like, put a little pop in that line there, fella.
Yeah.
He didn't really sell the jokes, or anything like that. So.
No, he really did. He just seemed tired.
I'll tell you the part that made no sense to me, which I know
Just
is
one part.
spoofed
Yeah.
often on Bond, right?
Yeah.
So Osato captures Bond and brings him to the seductress wench Helga Brandt, his assistant, to murder
Number
him.
11. Yes.
Right, to give him a murder, to do a murder on
She's
him.
got to do a murder on
And
him.
he's like,
right.
here's your tool, do the murder. And she takes out the tool. She's like, instead of doing a murder, I'm going to sex you, right?
Right.
Which is a Bond thing, but
Yeah.
I would think like, well, maybe she's going to sex him and then do the murder, right? But then she's like, nah, I like your plan. We'll go with your plan instead, where I'm not going to murder you, but I'm going to help you escape. And then they're in a plane together. And then she's like, oh, just kidding. I'm going to parachute out and make you die in the plane. Like, why not just cut his throat when you could have done it after this, or like while you're finishing this?
I'll tell you why. Because that was like the best part of the movie. That was
No,
awesome.
that didn't. That was not.
No, I mean, and I think you're right that it is a cliche of James Bond that he seduces all of these women, including the ones who are trying to kill him.
Yeah.
But I feel like they missed a step in that scene where he's got to do the seducing first.
I agree with you. But I mean, the seducing was done before, when he first went into the office and they were giving each other the eye. Of like,
I
hey.
guess it definitely did feel like there was a step missing. Like you can see him seducing Aki, the assistant to Tiger Tanaka.
Mhm.
And she's not his enemy, but you can see that their relationship kind of builds. Or Kissy, his
Yes.
fake wife,
Kissy.
another like all the women in James Bond movies have very respectful names. I think it's the word I'm looking for there.
That was the word you were looking
Yeah.
for.
But I mean, you can see as silly as it is, there's sort of a progression there where he does seduce those characters. And that really feels like it's missing in that scene where literally, like you said, 1 second I'm going to peel off your face. And then she's like, no, I'm going to make out with you.
Josh, have we not established that this whole year, this whole season is swinging 60s, free love? You want to kill me first? You're going to have to, sex me, I mean, that's it, Josh. People
guess
had a lot of sex.
they did. They still do.
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, but no, I mean, I'm agreeing with you about that particular scene and that particular character. But that's another sort of cliched element of James Bond that by this point people are expecting that to happen.
Right, and like the supervillain's like, you kill him, I must go do another thing.
Right. Yes.
Even though he's the biggest threat I've ever had in my life. You do the killing, I will be over here.
Yeah, exactly. And the elaborate death traps, and I mean the piranha pool in this movie. I mean, come on.
Classic Austin Powers.
Yeah. And that is one thing that you can see. This movie in particular has so many things that Austin Powers took.
Didn't this make you want to go back and rewatch Austin Powers?
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, Blofeld, we talked about, he's the villain here, played by Donald Pleasence, and he had previously appeared only as the shot of his hand or a disembodied voice. Yeah, and this is the first time we actually see him. And the way that Blofeld looks is just an iconic James Bond element, and of course was
Dr. Evil.
It's just straight up Dr. Evil. Yes. Yeah.
Of course, this is more legacy stuff, but
yes,
that's not my favorite homage to Blofeld and the James Bond Spectre, universe. Mine would be Mad and
Mad Magazine?
No, just the organization Mad and Inspector Gadget.
Oh,
and,
yes.
Who was that? Dr.
Claw. Yeah, I did love Dr.
Yeah.
Claw. Yeah, I watched a lot of Inspector Gadget as a kid.
Yeah. Go Gadget, go.
Exactly. Good stuff. But right, it's just so it's comical, obviously. But to me, I just didn't feel like it was comical in a fun way necessarily.
Okay. The music's awesome.
Sure, music is good.
Like I love it's. I mean, this is a silly word, but it's cinematic, and it really is. It's so big and grandiose, right?
Right.
And I mean, I said like I think the cinematography is very good, the art direction's good, so those things all work for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Should we talk about the racism?
What racism?
I mean, maybe racism is maybe too harsh a word, but certainly racial insensitivity, cultural insensitivity, let's say.
What? No, I know this is a tough one to put because like I think like in the intention wasn't bad, but the result of the action wasn't good.
Right. I mean, this is a movie where they're meaning to showcase Japan and Japanese culture and all of that.
Yeah. Much like the Karate Kid 2 did with wherever he went in the Karate Kid 2. I forget.
To Japan, probably?
Did he go to Osaka, maybe?
Okay, that's in Japan.
Okinawa.
Also in Japan.
There you go.
All right.
But they didn't paint themselves, so that's better.
Yeah. I mean, this is a movie that they shot a lot of it in Japan.
All of it.
Yeah.
They're in Pinewood, the interior.
Right, the interiors. But, a lot of location shooting in Japan. They worked with Toho Studios, which is a big, major Japanese studio.
And a lot of those actresses and actors were contracted through Toho.
Right. And I feel like, it's a low bar to cross. But if this movie was made 10 years earlier, it would have just cast a bunch of white people as the Japanese people.
Mickey Rooney.
Right.
And,
yeah. Even not 10 years earlier, even maybe the same year.
That's what I mean. I feel like they didn't try to be insensitive. And even the way they show him going undercover as a Japanese person, at least it was like Mrs. Doubtfire style makeup as opposed to just horrible, like, let's get a costume from a novelty store type thing,
Yeah. But I mean, that whole sequence was...
not good.
No, I mean, it's really like unnecessary and nonsensical within the context of the story. But yeah, it's super offensive. And it's kind of hilarious because Tanaka is like, we're going to make you Japanese. And that involves a wig and what looked like some prosthetics on his eyes, but then he didn't even look different. He just looked like Sean Connery.
You almost wish that Tanaka had a gadget for that where he could just go and laser him into like...
Or like a Mission Impossible kind of one of those masks.
Face replacement.
Right. Yeah, no,
like Black Widow.
Right. We didn't get to those until later in maybe... I think Pierce Brosnan did some of that kind of stuff, maybe.
I like Pierce Brosnan.
I do too.
He's got nothing to do with this movie, but I want it on the record. I'm a Pierce Brosnan fan.
Well, it's relevant. We'll talk about that. So
also, he was in Mrs. Doubtfire.
That is what I meant about how relevant it was.
I win the game.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, should we talk about any of the other performances beyond Connery?
What other performances? We already mentioned we like Tiger Tanaka, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
Donald Pleasence is fun as Blofeld. Tanaka is played by Tetsurō Tamba, who I looked up his filmography. It's like the Roger Corman of acting. This dude has acted in like almost 400 things, which is amazing. I love that. you
Yeah,
know?
he was a huge Japanese star, but I don't think he didn't use this to then star in other American
No,
movies.
I know. I think he was most famous for a TV show he did, G-Men or G-Men 75.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean the women have nothing to do, and they fawn over him. Aki is a little better than Kissy as far as what they are offered from a character standpoint, but no, the only other actor I want to talk about is the driver who James Bond beats up when they get to Osato's lair, which is, of course, the High Chief himself, Peter Maivia, aka The Rock's grandfather.
Oh, nice. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. Was he a wrestler too?
Yeah, Rock is a third generation wrestler. So
Amazing.
Peter Maivia to Rocky Johnson to The Rock. So,
All right. Yeah. I feel like The Rock could be get beat up James Bond or something.
I
in
feel like The
future.
Rock could be James Bond because, The Rock, his whole thing is franchises only.
That's true. He's big on the
Mhm.
franchises. So, but you're right. I think that maybe even more so than some other James Bond movies, the other characters, the other actors in this don't really matter. I mean, we also have, we should say, the sort of standard James Bond characters. You've got M, his boss.
A little.
And right, they're not in this movie that much. Q, the gadget guy who really shows up only to bring him Little Nelly, which I know you love,
Little
Jason.
Nelly's
Yeah.
great.
And Miss Moneypenny, the secretary. I did
The
love.
secretary.
She is. I did love at the beginning of this movie when they fake James Bond's death and he's given the burial at sea, and then they rescue him and they bring him to the submarine where M and Miss Moneypenny are hanging out. That M decided to bring his whole office into the submarine, including his secretary and her desk, all of the like knickknacks that sit on her desk. And, they're in a fucking submarine, but she has a little intercom to his office to tell him, oh, James Bond is here for you. He just kind of showed up,
Yeah.
that was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, all right. I think Josh, we've done a full referendum on this one, and maybe
Yeah.
I was a little too excited. Maybe you were a little too antithetical towards this one, but I'm ready to rate it out of 5 fake deaths.
5 fake deaths. All
Yeah.
right. You only live 5 times.
You only live. Yeah, sure. Why not? I don't know. I will admit on Letterboxd I gave this 3.5, but after your just sweltering beatdown of this thing, I'm gonna give it 3 fake deaths.
All right. I mean, hey, if you liked it, you liked it. That's fine. I didn't hate it. I wasn't going to give it 2.5 fake deaths. I mean, there's still charm to it. I just feel like it's there's better Bond movies. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
I was going to give it 3, but if you're bringing it down to 3 and you
You
liked
bring
it
it
so
up to
much more than me,
3.5.
I can't do that.
You go
but-
right up to 3.5.
All
right
right,
now.
3.5. Fuck it.
You say 2.5.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
Well, that does it. We don't need any more lists about it. This has been the ultimate say so on this film.
Yeah.
So don't make any more lists about it.
And really the definitive take on James Bond as a whole.
Yeah,
for
I don't need
sure.
to watch any of the other movies because I think you've caught me up on the entire series.
Well, we'll come back and talk a little bit about the legacy of You Only Live Twice. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this special bonus episode of our season on the films of 1967. We've been talking about You Only Live Twice and all things James Bond. And the legacy of this film, of course, is the continued and continuing James Bond franchise. As we said, Sean Connery at this point was kind of over James Bond. He did leave. We see at the end of this movie, at the end of the credits, it says James Bond will return in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that was the next James Bond movie starring George Lazenby. But that didn't really work out very well. And he left to be replaced by Sean Connery for one more film, for Diamonds Are Forever from 1971, which I have seen mainly because it's mostly set in Las Vegas. And it's not a good movie, but it has a lot of great vintage Las Vegas stuff in it, which is fun, worth checking out, for Vegas folks. But then Connery left again to be replaced by Roger Moore. And as we said, he returned for the sort of unofficial, non-sanctioned James Bond film Never Say Never Again in 1983. And I was gonna say, Jason, do you have a favorite James Bond movie? But obviously you.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I would say my favorite is Skyfall, the Daniel Craig film, which also has a great theme song by Adele. One of the best James Bond theme songs. But it just, to me, that and I'm not huge on James Bond, as we said, even though I've seen quite a few of the films at this point. But that is just like, it's a really good big action spectacle, but it does actually have some real grounded character stuff for James Bond and his childhood and going back. Skyfall is the name of the sort of like estate where he grew up, and his relationship with M, who at that point is played by Judi Dench in a number of the films. So yeah, Skyfall I feel like is a legit good action blockbuster
What
movie.
about of the classic Bond movie?
I think From Russia with Love, maybe the second Connery film. I haven't seen all of those, and it's been a while since I saw that one, but I remember liking that one. And The Spy Who Loved Me, as far as the Roger Moore films go, is pretty good. He's a better The Roger Moore films are known for being like the goofiest and most ridiculous, but that one is a decent balance of the like action spy stuff as well as the ridiculousness.
Is Roger Moore better as James Bond or as the James Bond type character in the Cannonball Run?
Probably the latter, but I don't know. I mean, of course,
that makes me happy.
One of the things is that, I mean, I don't know if Connery did as much, but you mentioned Roger Moore, and of course, when we talked about Hot Fuzz, we've got Timothy Dalton,
who's wonderful in that film.
He is, and I think Pierce Brosnan too. That these James Bond actors, once they stop being James Bond, they really enjoy making fun of James Bond.
Yeah, and we see Brosnan now as kind of getting to that that next phase where he's doing a lot of great character work, and we kind of want that with these guys.
Yeah, I think so. I think Brosnan especially has had a chance to really do a lot of that, and we'll see what Daniel Craig does. His final Bond movie, allegedly, No Time to Die, as we're recording this, is supposed to open in October. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, but he kills it in Knives Out, and he'll be in at least the first sequel.
Yeah, I think he's planned to be in at least 2 sequels.
I thought he was
Out.
great in that movie.
Yeah, he's fun. I mean, he's clearly having fun, and I think he hasn't parodied James Bond necessarily, but he has enjoyed sort of goofing off and playing with his serious image in that, or in Logan Lucky, the Steven Soderbergh film.
I didn't love that one.
I didn't either, but I think you can tell in those movies that Daniel Craig is enjoying, sort of spoofing himself in a way.
I like that.
Yeah,
Go
me too.
Daniel Craig.
Good that when these actors have sort of.
Will we ever have a black James Bond? Because like Idris Elba is the natural.
He is too old for it at this point, though. I think Idris Elba.
Daniel Kaluuya.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of names that have come up, and I think, man, we don't know, but I think there's been so much discussion about that the producers are gonna go in that direction in some way. Just recently, as we're recording this, I've seen people talk about Dev Patel as a potential James Bond. I think he'd be really good at it.
I don't know, man. There's he'd have to buff up, right?
Well, but they all do. I mean, any of them, anyone who takes on one of those roles, any of those.
Why I said The Rock. He's already buff. He doesn't need to buff up.
No, The Rock is too buff. And I mean, one thing they may go with some diversity, but one thing I don't think they'll ever do is get a non-British person to play James Bond.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't think The Rock could do it, but I'm curious to see who ends up as James Bond next.
Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett could totally be James Bond, 100%. Although she's Australian, so. But then again, so is George Lazenby, so who knows? So I mean, beyond we talk about Sean Connery was sort of resentful of potentially being typecast as James Bond, but of course he went on to have an amazing career as a million different kinds of things. Won an Oscar for The Untouchables. Do you have a favorite Connery movie or performance?
Good question. Come back to me. You're the man now, dog.
Yeah, there's that. There's certainly that.
Do you?
I've never seen that movie. I've just seen the meme.
Yeah, I've never seen that movie either. What's your point?
Yeah, I mean, I love him as Indiana Jones's dad.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's my answer. You took it from
and
me.
I've actually never seen The Untouchables. Have you?
Yeah, he's good in The Untouchables.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Dave, do you have a favorite Sean Connery performance?
I hate to do this, but I was going to go with Indiana Jones' dad too.
No,
so,
that's great.
yeah.
It's a great performance. It's a really fun movie.
Back when Indiana Jones meant something, before Shia LaBeouf and the flying monkeys just skull fucked that thing to death.
I mean, it was always a little silly. So,
but it's horrible after that.
Well, this is not really relevant to this episode.
It's relevant to my hatred of the crystal skulls.
I guess so. Blofeld is another character who ended up being played by a number of actors as one of the iconic villains of the James Bond series. Once we saw his face in this movie, they were able to kind of show him again, although Donald Pleasence never played him again. But Telly Savalas, Max von Sydow, and of course, Christoph Waltz, most recently in the Daniel Craig movies.
That's a good list of actors. Right?
That is a good list of actors. Lewis Gilbert.
Did Christoph Waltz like do it? Like how did
I think once Dr. Evil existed,
that was
you can't do it that way.
So he just
did Christoph Waltz. He just did Christoph Waltz.
I mean, he's so good. I love Christoph Waltz.
Yeah. But no, I think you can't have him be the kind of because everyone just thinks of Austin Powers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Lewis Gilbert, as we said, directed a couple of others. He directed The Spy Who Loved Me, which I mentioned, and Moonraker, two Roger Moore, James Bond movies, and had a whole big career directing a whole lot of stuff all the way through 2002 was the final year.
Yeah, I mean, Educating Rita with Michael Caine. And then I remember when I was a kid, a film that he directed, which I have no idea is good or not, but constant commercials for Shirley Valentine. Do you remember that?
I don't know that film. The biggest famous one I think is Alfie with Michael Caine.
What's it all about?
Right, which was it was predated. It was before this, but that's probably his most famous non-Bond film.
Educating Rita also with Michael Caine.
Oh, yeah. And Roald Dahl, as we said, was not really a screenwriter. The one other screenplay he wrote that was produced was another Ian Fleming adaptation, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I hadn't realized was Ian Fleming.
Didn't he do the screenplay for Willy Wonka, I thought?
He was not credited with it, I don't think.
I thought he wrote that one.
If he did write it, he was heavily rewritten because he denounced that movie, that they had changed so much.
He's great.
He is great. Also racist, I believe. But
not great. I don't like that part.
But
racist against who?
Or I think he was anti-Semitic more than racist.
Also not great as a Jew. I'm not a fan.
But I mean, I loved Roald Dahl's books as a kid, and still I think there's a lot of great. Like one thing about him is really enjoyable is that he wrote for children a lot, but it was always this like weird twisted
dark
stuff, for children, which I loved as a kid. Have you seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang?
No, I've seen James and the Giant Peach.
Yeah, James and Giant Peach is great. Willy Wonka, as we talked about in our producers episode with Gene Wilder. The Witches, the original version of The Witches.
Not a huge fan.
I like that one a lot. But that was another one that I think Dahl denounced because they made some changes to his book. So he was a crank. He was definitely a crank.
Did he say these witches don't hate enough Jews?
Well, there's definitely speculation that some of the way that he described the witches were based on Jewish stereotypes, but that's a whole...
Man, no, you just ruined all of Roald Dahl for me.
That's a whole other episode. Really.
Next, you're going to tell me Bobby Fischer was anti-Semitic.
So many digressions here. Yeah, I don't know. The only other thing on the legacy, and we've just talked about this a lot, but Austin Powers.
Yeah, and it's still indelible.
Yeah, it really is.
So I know Mike Myers gets heat and he's got the new show coming out where he plays like 7 characters, but like when he hits a home run, he hits a grand slam.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen those movies in a while, but I think at least the first one is still pretty fun. Dave, I feel like this is something you probably love.
Oh yeah, I love those movies. And I haven't watched them in a long time either, but I caught a little bit of Goldmember recently and it was funnier than I remember it being.
I didn't like that. I liked the first one.
I know most people don't like the third one.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a long time, but I mean, the more early James Bond movies you watch, the more you can see how much they took from them.
Did anyone ever do an impression of Austin Powers?
No, I think much like Borat, no one has ever done the impression.
Someone should really do it and like maybe do it a lot, just like all the time.
Because it would never get old.
No, it would be like if someone made an innuendo and then said something like, "That's what she said" afterward. That would be
always funny.
Really fresh.
Yeah, that's why Jason's a successful stand-up comedian.
I'm not, but I don't do that stuff, Josh. I save my impressions for titans like George Kennedy.
Yeah. Do you want to get any more impressions out of your system before we end?
I feel good. You're acting like I only do this show to do the impressions.
No, I appreciate your impressions.
They serve a purpose on this show.
They do. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm not going to just do an Austin Powers impression just to, just like I'm not a piece of meat, Josh.
Okay. You're not a dancing monkey for our pleasure?
No.
Okay. Well, that is You Only Live.
Feelings.
That is You Only Live Twice, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Thank you. If you're listening to this on Patreon, you probably know all about our social medias, but Jason, you want to give them all that info?
Sure. AwesomeMovieYear.com. That's a website. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Those are social medias. Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, another social media. Jason Harris Comedy on Instagram and Facebook. More social medias. Jay Harris Comedy on Twitter, another social media. GoForJason.com. Questionable as if that's a website or not.
JoshBellHatesEverything.com, also questionable. And I'm also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And again, if you're on the Patreon, you probably know, but you can check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Someone should throw that thing in a crater.
Oh, man.
I'm on it every month. What are you talking about?
Piecing It Together can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces.
Yeah,
And-
that's great. Where you can choose your favorite cartoon dog because someone puts up a meme.
There's some memes.
Oh.
There's some memes there. There's some other decent stuff. And if you're listening to this episode later, you can join the Patreon for bonus episodes each season. And where is that, Dave?
It is the Produced by David Rosen Patreon. It's patreon.com/by-David-Rosen.
Stuff from us there, as well as Piecing It Together and some great David Rosen music.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.